Welcome to your video on percent basics. The purpose of this video is just to review some of the things that you've learned in previous courses about percent. I'm going to encourage you again, make sure you are watching and listening, and then make use of the pause button if you need more time to write something down than what we're allowing. The first thing we're going to do is look at different ways to represent percents. There are three different ways that you can write them. First, as the percent itself, second, as a decimal, and then third, as a fraction. And you need to be comfortable using all three of those representations. So we'll start with the given percent and we'll move to the decimal. All you have to do is divide that percent by 100, which should make sense because percent itself means per 100. And if you take 60 divided by 100, you get 0.60. Zero point 0.6 would also be an acceptable answer. You don't need the zero there, but I think it's helpful because it clearly shows you 60. To get to the fraction, you can think of it two different ways. And what I like to do is actually go from the decimal. Often we read that as 0.60, but if you think back to the way that you were taught to read using place value, that would be 60 hundredths. And so that helps you set up your fraction, 60 hundredths. You could also go back to thinking about a percent is a number out of 100, and obviously that gets you to the same place. Now, with a fraction, you need to make sure that you are always providing your answer in reduced form. So it's not okay. It's a good start to write 60 over 100, but it is not okay to leave it that way. You need to get it into lowest terms. And so if you divide both of those numbers by 20, you come up with 3 over 5. And that would be your fraction representation. All right, our next row, we are given a decimal 0.25. And so we'll go backwards to the percent first. And since we're going in the other direction, we're just going to use the opposite operation. So we are going to multiply by 100. You may have been taught to move the decimal this way or that way, but I find often that students can't remember which way to move the decimal. So I think if you use the multiplying and dividing, that might be a little bit more helpful. So if we multiply 0.25 by 100, we get 25%. When we go to the fraction, you can either think of it as 25 out of 100, or again, you could read that decimal as 25 hundredths. And then, of course, you have to reduce, and 25 over 100 will give us 1/4. Our third example, we are starting with the fraction. And we really have no choice but to go to the decimal first. And to get to the decimal, you are going to divide. And you just take the top number divided by the bottom number. So it's going to be 3 divided by 8. When you do, your calculator gives you 0.375. You may be tempted to round that, but I want you to give that number because that is exact. That is exactly what 3/8 is. So we're going to change that to a percent. And again, we're going to multiply by 100. And when we do that, we end up with a decimal as part of our percentage. And that's okay. Just means 37.5%. So I guess the main thing to remember here as you're working on problems is don't do rounding unless you are instructed to. All right, the next one, have you ever heard a coach tell you to give 110%? You can have a percent that is over 100. You're still going to do the same thing. You're going to divide by 100 to get to the decimal. And when you divide by 100, you get 1.1. You could write 1.10 if you wanted to indicate that you had the 110, whatever you're more comfortable with. Now, when we do the fraction, I'm going to go back to the percent column because I know that 110% is out of 100. So I'm going to write it as 110 over 100. If I went to the decimal, I'd end up with a mixed fraction, and that would just get messy to deal with. Again, we can reduce this one, and we can divide both by 10, and we end up with 11 tenths. Our next example, we are going to convert 0.044 to a percent. So we multiply that number by 100, and we get 4.4%. Now here, I don't think the percent out of 100 is going to be helpful at all because we've got that decimal to deal with. So I'm going to go back to the decimal, and I'm going to encourage you to read that using your place value. That would be read as 44 thousandths. And so that is going to be your starting fraction, 44 over 1,000. And I know you're thinking it has to do percent, it has to be out of 100, but it's because of the way that that decimal is structured. When you reduce, you are going to divide both top and bottom by 4, and you end up with 11 over 250. All right, our final one. This is an interesting one, 5 over 6. If we divide on the calculator, we get a decimal that is 0.833333333. And if you're working at your desk right now, I'd encourage you to actually type that into your calculator so that you can see that. So what we're going to do to indicate that that 3 continues forever, because I told you that you can't round, we're going to use that repeating decimal sign. We're going to put the bar above the 3. So now the way that that's going to affect us when we multiply by 100, if you have that decimal on your calculator, I want you to actually multiply on your calculator the 0.83 repeating by 100. And what you're going to get is 83.333333333. Now you don't have to write all those out. Again, just put the repeating bar over that. And this would be an acceptable answer. But some of you know that the 0.3 repeating actually represents 1/3. So another way to write this answer would be 83.33%. Whichever you prefer, both would be acceptable. What would not be acceptable is 83.3%, because that does not show us that that 3 repeats. So if you write that, even though it's close, and you kind of know what you're doing, you did not represent that repeating. So just make sure that you're specific. All right, now we're going to work on solving some problems using, again, that proportion method that we had just talked about in our last video. So when you set a proportion, you're going to have equal ratios. And I said you're always going to start with something that you know. And I think most of us by now know that a percent is always out of 100. And so one side of your ratio is always going to involve that percentage over 100. And then the other side is going to be the part over the whole, which should make sense. But then some of you may have some words that you're looking for in problems. Oftentimes, the part is going to be kind of associated with the word is, and then the whole is going to be associated with the word of. In fact, you may have even learned that the percent over 100 equals is over of. I caution you a little bit because the vocabulary might not always be there, but if it is helpful, feel free to use that. So we have 3 problems that are going to just look at different ways that these problems could be set up, but we always want you to use a proportion to figure them out. So the question here says, what is 20% of 30? So I said we're always going to start with the percent over 100. So you're going to start by writing 20 over 100. And then the 20 is the percent or the part of 100. And we want to know what is the part or the corresponding part of 30. So the X is going to go on the top. And that what is, do you see how the is kind of connected to the what? And then we're looking for the whole, which is 30, to go on the bottom. And so that of 30, that of is associated with the bottom number. And then once you get set up with the proportion, it should be pretty simple to solve. We cross multiply and we get 100x equals 600. And then you divide both sides by 100 and we come up with x equals 6. All right, our next problem. 4 is what percent of 48? Well, here it says what percent. So we know that the unknown is going to be the percent. So x has to go on top of 100. And then it says 4 is what percent? So that 4 is taking the corresponding place as the percent. It's also kind of connected with that is word. And then the of 48 is going to go on the bottom. So 4 is the part and 48 is the whole. Now, I caution you here, don't always put the small number on the top and the big number on the bottom, because like we showed you in the table up above, you can have a percent that is more than 100. So make sure that you're clearly reading the problem. All right, we are going to solve by cross multiplying. So we have 48x equals 400. We are going to divide both sides by 48. And I would encourage you press pause and actually do that division. And what you come up with is x equals 8.333333, which we actually just talked about. We're just going to throw the repeating sign up above there. And because this one is specifically asking us for the percentage, you do have to write out the answer with the percent. So it'd be 8.3 repeating percent. All right, our final one. 15 is 30% of what number? So here we are going to put our 30 over 100 because the percent is always associated with 100. And then 15 is that 30%. So the is again is connected with the 15, but that's also the part. And then of what number is what we're looking for. So our variable is going to go on the bottom. We start by cross multiplying. So we have 30x equals 1500. Divide both sides by 30. And x is 50. So these are just some basic things that hopefully you've run across with percents before, but we felt were worth reviewing. What you can start on next is the percent basics practice in your packet.